Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the last weekend, the last show that we broadcast of Living in Mexico before the new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, is sworn in. And it's an important show because I think we need to, instead of trying to anticipate what could potentially happen during the next administration, um, I think it's more important right now just to review where Mexico finds itself, not only in terms of economic terms, social terms, development programs, uh, security. I think what we're going to use the show today is to review what Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's legacy is for Claudia Sheinbaum and for Mexico. And to do this analysis, I can't tell you all how much I appreciate Carlos Ramirez from Integralia joining us today. Carlos, I know you have you have a you Integralia has published a document that um, tries to lay out in in data data where Mexico is as we speak, literally hours away from the new president swearing in. Welcome to the show, Carlos. Talk to us about this document.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you for having me again. And certainly it is a very interesting times in Mexico. We are about 4 days before Claudia Sheinbaum comes into power, and there is certainly a lot of expectations on what can happen in the next coming months and years with Mexico. But first, we thought at Integralia was necessary to, let's say, to close the AMLO administration with an overview on almost all topics in which public policy in one way or another influence, and try to influence where the country is heading. And we publish a document with a lot of data on where we are right now. At this moment, where is Mexico, and what will Sheinbaum inherit? What we did was basically separate in four big pillars: the data, what happened with the economy and with finances, public finances mainly, what happened with development indicators, what happened with democracy indicators, and finally, what happened during this past years with security. So it is a final layout on the AMLO legacy for Claudia Sheinbaum.
Well, let's talk about. I like the way you all laid out. I think our audience who is following us on YouTube Live can see the document. And why don't you just lay out the initial data on economy and finance? What should we highlight?
So in economy and finance, there is mixed news, Ana Maria. Some of the indicators that are shown in our report are certainly positive. For example, there is a significant increase in the minimum wage. As we all know, President Lopez Obrador increased minimum wage more than 100% in real terms, actually, which led to an increase in the overall wages of many Mexicans, right? There is also a reality of having a very low unemployment rate, record level unemployment rate at the end of the administration of Lopez Obrador. So at least seen from the wage employment perspective, it has been a fairly good administration, a fairly good sexennium. However, the other side of the story is that this has had unintended consequences in the sense that Mexico has lost productivity, has lost competitiveness, and the AMLO administration will close up as the administration with the lowest growth rate of the past 40 years and with income per capita basically stagnant. So certainly, I mean, there are a lot of indicators in this part of the report, but certainly one could argue that their short-term indicators are overall looking not that bad. But if you look to the drivers of, let's say, prosperity in the medium and long term, the story is not good. The story is not good. The legacy is not good. And my belief is that there are certain policies that Lopez Obrador pushed for short-term gains, for political gains, which are going to have implications for the medium and long term, and certainly will not be easy for Sheinbaum during her tenure.
What part of the data that you describe right now, which one worries you the most?
Definitely the low growth rate of, I mean, basically the zero growth rate of per capita GDP per capita income is definitely the one that most worries me, because no country in the world, no country in the world has developed without an increase, a sustainable or a constant increase in GDP per capita. So the government argues that this indicator is not that important because at the end of the day, our GDP, although it increased relatively little, the overall GDP, not the GDP per capita, which remains stagnant, it's really income has been distributed in a better way. So we have the same pie, but the pie has been distributed in a better way. That argument really falls short of, let's say, the evidence we have of other countries in the world that have prospered. And no country in the world, to repeat myself, has ever prospered without a sustained increase in GDP per capita. So that is the one that worries me more the most. Obviously, they are interlinked: productivity fall, competitiveness fall, GDP low growth, GDP per capita stagnation. They are in some way or another together. They go together, Ana Maria.
So I guess part of the in trying to understand what Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's legacy is. I mean, if you are of the poorest of the poor, or lower middle class, your life is better. Isn't that? I mean, when you think about it, I mean, he has improved the lot of millions of Mexicans. The problem is now, how do you continue improving the lot of the other millions of Mexicans and assure growth? Is that a good assessment?
It is, but I would include in that perspective that, let's say, Mexicans have today better wages, definitely. Mexicans receive more money from social programs, particularly, let's say, segments of the population that are more vulnerable. There is more money coming from the government directly to the overall population. And that has helped to lower the overall level of poverty in the country. Okay, together with, by the way, with remittances, which is not something the government should be celebrating, but it is, by the way. But anyway, poverty has falling during these past years. However, Ana Maria, the problem is that the question is if this is sustainable in the medium and long term. And what about other factors that are very significant for Mexicans? Let's say human capital factors that determine if someone is going to be better in the long term. What are those? Health, education. And those two factors have actually come back. I mean, have fallen back during the administration of Lopez Obrador. So I mean, it is true. Mexicans have a little bit more money in their pockets thanks to these factors I explained: minimum wage, more money coming from the government, remittances. But at the same time, they have worse health care system. They have a worse education system. So how can you reconcile both issues? We are in some way or another giving Mexicans short-term gains, but in some way or another, we are creating the conditions for them to remain poor in the next coming years and decades.
Today's guest is Carlos Ramirez from Integralia. He's been joining us throughout the years. Integralia, this consulting firm, published a really good document. In fact, we're going to be linking the document when we in this podcast, in this YouTube live, so you may have access to it. And also, we're going to move it through my Twitter accounts, because it's an extraordinary way of understanding, Carlos, the legacy Andrés Manuel López Obrador with numbers. I think part of the problem in trying to analyze what has happened with López Obrador in the last, or what López Obrador is leaving behind, is that we've been focusing a lot in what he says and not necessarily what he did. And of course, in the last couple of the last 2 weeks, I mean, the number of decisions that have been made by President-elect and now future President of Mexico, um, Claudia Sheinbaum, are very much focused on his words and not what she will on his words, not what she will be able to do. Of course, this diplomatic crisis with Spain, I think, is an example of how, in the last couple of days, we're much more focused on the fact that the King of Spain is not coming to her swearing in ceremony, and not perhaps focusing on who is part of the U.S. delegation, which I think is also a message, or who is actually coming to her swearing in ceremony, which I think it is important, but less important than what she will have to do as of October 2nd, as president of Mexico. So let's look at other data that you have published, and that you all are publishing in this document.
Yeah. So I mentioned in my previous conversation two of the four pillars that construct the report. Let us turn now, Ana Maria, to the third pillar, which is called government and politics. Essentially, here the message is López Obrador has had enormous approval rates. He leaves office with a lot of popularity. I have no question that he is the most popular president of recent times. However, if you look, people trust more in the government. People has overall put a good mark on his administration. However, if you look the indicators of two very sensible issues, corruption and democracy advancement, what we have is no gains in corruption. Remember, López Obrador won the 2018 election basically campaigning against corruption, but we saw very little in his administration. And one could argue that we even saw setbacks in some areas. And democracy. Although democracy is always sort of an ambiguous indicator because people tend to interpret democracy in different ways. There are several reports published in different parts of the world which try to measure the quality of democracy in different countries in the world. And Mexico, basically what happened during these 6 years is that we fell behind. All the indicators of democracy quality are going, unfortunately, in the wrong direction. And that is something that we have discussed in previous occasions, Ana Maria. There has been very significant institutional setbacks, institutional destruction, I would argue, that is explaining why these indicators are showing that. And with this recent reform approved of the judicial branch of simply the checks and balances that we have been building for the past 30 years in the country since we transitioned to democracy are going back. We're falling behind again. So yeah, I mean, again, we have a very popular president, good, but the overall legacy of Lopez Obrador is not positive, neither from a corruption nor from a democratic perspective.
You know, when I didn't ask you, and I think it is important to talk about what happened with Pemex because and you and I know we've spoken about this, is we believe that Pemex could be the downfall. The decisions that the new president makes in regards to the future of Pemex and Mexico's energy policy could define what happens with Mexico's economy. So I'm looking here through this. Here it is. Mexico's production went down, natural gas, but and also crude oil. But it also, I mean, I mean, there's some good news behind Pemex, or am I wrong? I mean, look at the price of gasoline. It definitely went up, but it was expected to go up.
So yeah, I mean, we could actually do a single report to try to really gauge what happened with Pemex during the past 6 years. But I wouldn't say, Ana Maria, that the legacy is good. I would say that actually the legacy is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Definitely, there are certain aspects of Pemex that one could argue, okay, the government was able to relatively limit the downfall of oil production that had been going on in the past 10 or 15 years. It also was able to produce more gasolines domestically. It also was able to build a new refinery, which, by the way, hasn't been finished, but at the end of the day, it will be a new infrastructure for the country. However, Ana Maria, the problem is that it has been at an enormous cost from different areas and views. One, fiscally, it has cost 1.5 billion pesos that could have been used for education, for health, for security, for infrastructure. And basically that money has gone to Pemex to save Pemex. So it has been a very costly endeavor. Second, Pemex owes 100 billion US dollars to its debtors, but it also owes $20 billion to its the people that participate in the oil industry, the companies. So basically, Pemex is, in some way or another, is creating a situation where companies could end up failing and going to bankruptcy because they are not being paid. And that legacy is going to be for Sheinbaum, right? And moreover, the decisions taken by the administration, not one single one, let's say not one, really tackles the fundamental problems of the company. So
Mhm.
Sheinbaum will come in with a company that is, in my view, worse shape than that in 2018, and with no plan to really do something fundamentally to change the route that is the company is following, which is not a good route.
Before we talk about security, uh, uh, public security and violence, we do have to talk about education and health. What does in our audiences, those who are following us on YouTube Live, can see the information provided clearly on education. Although I guess they consider politically to have been successful in terms of changing what they perceive to be a neoliberal and just educational system. But the data is quite concerning.
It is, Ana Maria, it is, because what we see in the data is that Mexico has, again, fallen behind during these past years.
Hmm.
We, our educational evaluation during this recent report that the OECD presents every 5 years about education situation around the world, Mexico fell back. Mexico fell back. You can also see it in the number of children that are attending schools. There is a setback also on that. We have really not a single indicator where you can feel there has been a significant improvement. In health, the situation is even worse. Lopez Obrador came into power and he basically canceled a relatively successful program that Mexico had called the Seguro Popular.
Right.
And he started experimenting with different alternative programs, and basically he failed. And in the meantime, 30 million Mexicans lost access to education,
Healthcare.
healthcare. Healthcare.
Yeah.
So,
Healthcare.
yeah. So, I mean, again, this is two very important critical indicators of long-term prosperity,
Mhm.
health and education, and the two are not looking good after 6 years of this administration.
Joining us today is Carlos Ramirez from Integralia, providing us, talking about a document that was published in the last couple of days, providing just hard data in terms of trying to understand Andrés Manuel López Obrador's legacy or the legacy of his administration. And one of the issues that we've conversed a lot on this show, Carlos, as you know very well, and it's a issue that I follow very closely, has to do with security. And I just, there is just no way that they can paint a picture of any success in this area. And in fact, the president has admitted that this is one of the areas where there has been a major fallback, and he is leaving at a time where there is an enormous crisis, security crisis, simply because two of the factions of the Sinaloa cartel are at it, and the violence is being felt not only in the state of Sinaloa but around the country. Let's talk about the data regarding security issues, Carlos.
Again, Ana Maria, what we have here is let's say, a mixed picture, but really nothing to celebrate. There are some indicators that have improved. Um, Overall indicators of, I mean, definitely homicides have fallen a bit. Um, the overall robbery data has fallen a bit. This, I mean, cars that are stolen have fallen. I mean, there are some indicators. The perception of insecurity has fallen. However, the problem is that the country still has a very high number of homicides every year. Actually, the administration of Lopez Obrador is closing in very, 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 very close to 200,000 homicides during his administration. How can you call a success a situation in which 200,000 Mexicans have been killed in the past 6 years? There is no way you can call this a success. Despite all the propaganda coming from the government, this has been a failure. And moreover, there are other data in terms of security that are not looking good, that is not looking good. Extortion is going up in some areas of the country, which is more a qualitative indicator. There seems to be more penetration from criminal organizations in both from an economic and political standpoint. You have definitely an enormous amount of people that disappeared during this administration, which in some or another could be people that are already dead and are not quantified into the data. So it has been a very, very difficult sexennium. And certainly Sheinbaum inherits a very difficult environment, particularly because of what you mentioned happening in Sinaloa, but that is moving into other states also. So yeah, I mean, the overall legacy of Lopez Obrador, I wouldn't call this I wouldn't dare call it a positive legacy. I would say that it is certainly some indicators have moved in the right direction, but overall it's a negative legacy. No te escucho, Ana María. No te escucho, Ana María.
There we go. I'm sorry, I had my microphone was off. Um, there is um, there is something. I mean, this is a difficult question and to answer, but let's try to at least provide an initial analysis. Is there any information out there that we are not considering that will explain why more than 50% of the population voted for Claudia Sheinbaum, an election that is pretty much considered a referendum of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador and his policy and his government? I mean, there is a large part of the population that either believe that they're better off than they were maybe 6 years ago, or that maybe the opposition candidates or the opposition in general do not provide any assurances that they could continue providing or improving their lot or their lives. Do you understand my question? I mean, I look at the data and I would say there's a lot of debt, uh, social debt, security debt, that, and I'm not too sure that Mexico is better off in general, but most of the population feels they're better off. How do we explain that?
And there seems to be yes, absolutely. 6 or even 7 out of 10 Mexicans believe they are better off I mean, they overall score good numbers for Lopez Obrador administration. There are probably 2 factors that explain that. One, again, I mentioned it, wages, remittances, more social spending. The other factor has to do with how Lopez Obrador created a very successful narrative that basically allowed him to blame everything that the problems the country faces, blame those problems to the past, and blame the past of his own mistakes, and in many ways creating a very successful communication strategy, I would argue propaganda strategy. He was able to convince a lot of Mexicans that
Hmm.
he was changing. He was making the country better. Although all the indicators or many of the indicators are not saying the same story. So yeah, I would say, and I would also argue that Lopez Obrador was a president that was close to the people, let's say, close to
Yeah.
Mexicans. He in some way or another gained uh, Mexicans from,
Confidence.
because yeah, exactly, of being very close to them in some way or another, uh, and Mexicans felt he was one of them. He was part of them. So, but the indicators, that's why indicators are always cold, right? Because
Yeah.
they tell you the real story despite the fact of the perceptions.
Mm. Well, it's always great to have you on the show, Carlos Ramirez from Integralia. Once again, thank you for joining us this last weekend of the administration of President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. As of next weekend, we're going to be talking about and analyzing the new administration of President uh, Claudia Sheinbaum. It's always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to go to a commercial break. Please don't go away. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and there's much more ahead here on Living in Mexico. I'll be right back.